Good evening. Hope everybody is staying cool. Welcome to the Town of Avon Advisory Plan Commission meeting. If you are interested in having a copy of the agenda, they are available on the tables to the right of the audience. We will be conducting business as outlined on the agenda. From time to time, the board may deviate from the agenda, and as president of this body, I will inform those in attendance of any deviations. This meeting is being recorded for the public record. Because of this, we request that personal conversations are kept to a minimum and that all cell phones are set to vibrate. This would be a good time to take your phone out and make sure it's on silent. Any phone calls should be taken outside of the chambers. If you are interested in commenting during the public hearing portion of the commission's deliberations, please sign up on the sheets located on the tables to the right of the audience. When your name is called, please step forward to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Please address your comments to the board and not to the staff or to the petitioner. Your comments should relate directly to the case at hand. During the conduct of the public hearing portion of the commission's deliberations, the petitioner will have 10 minutes to present their case to the commission. Remonstrators will have 10 minutes to present objections to the petition. Persons in support of the petition, other than the petitioner, will have 10 minutes to present support for the petition. Finally, the petitioner will close the public hearing portion of the presentation with a 5-minute rebuttal period. Once the public hearing is closed, no additional testimony will be heard unless it is solicited by members of the commission during the question and answer phase of the commission's deliberations. Subdivision plat and development plan petitions are ministerial requests, meaning that if the proposal meets the requirements set forth in the town's development ordinances, the Plan Commission must approve the request. In the interest of transparency, state law requires that the Plan Commission hold a public hearing even if the development proposal must be approved. Responses to public comments and questions may be given once the public hearing portion is closed. We do understand there may be several persons who wish to speak. In order to keep the meeting running in a timely fashion, we would request that you not repeat previous comments. Thank you for your assistance in facilitating a respectful, fair, and timely meeting. And again, welcome to our meeting. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call.
Susan.
Present.
Guggenberger.
Here.
Ransberg.
Here.
Kaufman.
Here.
Reed.
Here.
Rockebrand.
Present.
Spencer. Spencer is absent.
We do have a quorum. We now move on to the approval of the meeting minutes from May 27th. Have the commission members have an opportunity to review the minutes? Are there any suggested changes, edits, questions? No? I'll take a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
I'll make that motion to approve the minutes from the May 27th, 2025 meeting as presented.
Second.
Having had a motion and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries. The meeting minutes are approved. We're now moving on to the public comment section of our meeting. And this is an opportunity for those of you who are present to come and speak to the commission about any item that is not already on the agenda. If you want to talk about something on the agenda, then wait till we get to that part. But if there's something else you want to speak about, two-made chicken restaurants on 36, anything like that, now's your opportunity to come forward and be heard. Is there anybody who'd like to step forward? Having nobody step forward, the public comment section of our meeting is closed. Request for continuances or agenda modifications.
Staff has no requests.
Okay. We do not have any old business. We are now moving on to new business. which the first one is MIP 2502, replat of minor plat 0604.
Thank you, members of the commission. This is a minor plat located at the corner of 100 North and Avon Avenue. Currently developed on the property is a Hendricks Bank. It is, the overall parcel is 3.948 acres, and it is zoned C2 general commercial. Previous cases on this site was the development of the bank in 2006, and then the remainder of the parcel that you're considering tonight is undeveloped. This is the subject parcel outlined, Avon Avenue, 100 North, and you see the bank property at the corner. And then this other lot that we're considering tonight is this undeveloped piece to the west of the bank. I'm sorry, to the east of the bank. So lot 1 would contain the existing branch bank, and lot 2 would be available for development under the C2 district. We do not have any development plans proposed. The proposed subdivision is compliant with all sections of the Unified Development Ordinance. This is a copy of the plat. You'll see lot 1 and lot 2. There's an existing entrance onto 100 North in between the two lots, and there'll be an easement that they'll share that access. This is what it looks like with the bank on it. The bank here, the access here, and then that access point, that easement that they'll share between lots 1 and 2. Staff is recommending approval, subject to our standard conditions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
That existing easement is an existing road cut then too for the,
Correct. There's a road cut here, and it's actually going to be on lot 2. And then there's an easement proposed for that, so the bank will still have access to it. And then there's a access easement down here in this corner for this access.
thank you.
And this does not need a rezone or waivers or anything. It's just simply dividing one plat into 2 parcels.
Correct.
One commercial
Correct.
plat into 2 parcels. Okay. Any further questions for staff? Okay, we'll have the petitioner come forward.
Good evening. My name is Parker Mays with Banning Engineering. Address is 853 Columbia Road, Suite 101 in Plainfield. Thank you, Linda. Did a pretty good job explaining everything. It made my job pretty easy. We agree with everything in the staff letter, and we're here looking for approval. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there anybody here who'd like to speak for or against this particular petition? I'm assuming you don't want to respond to the lack of interest in your petition. Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, moving on to discussion. Any questions for the petitioner or general? I think this is pretty straightforward. We're not going to be having to deal with any access issues because there's already access on 100 North. Okay, in that case, we would entertain a motion if there's no other discussion.
Make a motion. Move that we approve MIP 02, replat of minor plat, number 06-04, request to divide 3.95 acres into 2 lots, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report, since it has satisfied all the requirements for a minor plat under state law and subject to the approved findings of fact.
I'll second.
Having heard a motion and a second, we'll now take a vote.
Rockerbrand.
4.
Reed.
4.
Kaufman.
4.
Ransford.
4,
Guckenberger.
4.
Zuzen.
4.
Motion carries and the replat is approved. Moving on now to MAP 2507, Whispering Pines South. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone, we've been here a couple of times before, and there have been some pretty passionate responses to this. I would remind everybody to be respectful. Everyone will have an opportunity to be heard in a timely manner, and we would ask that we all behave like adults. So, staff.
Thank you, President Ransberg, members of the commission. MAPP 2507 is a request for preliminary approval of a major subdivision plat for Whispering Pines South. Property is located at 1520 South County Road 625 East, which is basically the southwest corner of 625 and 150, that being 625 running north-south. 150 south running east-west here turns into Whispering Pines Boulevard at the north end of this site. It is just about little shade over 32 acres. It's zoned R2. It was rezoned a few months ago with zoning map amendment ZA 2411, which included additional commitments in addition to those commitments that were in effect from 2003 when this property was rezoned when it was under Hendricks County jurisdiction. And along with the rezoning that the commission and town council approved recently, there was a request to modify some of the commitments back from 2003, which that request was also approved. This would divide the little over 32 acres into 64 lots, and it includes a waiver of design standards of our subdivision regulations in Chapter 7 of the UDO to allow for a reduced right-of-way width for the internal streets. Again, this is the property. It's zoned R2 per the recent rezoning. It's surrounded by residential and or agricultural use. Whispering Pines subdivision zoned R2 to the north. Bridgewater, which is under Hendricks County jurisdiction, zoned RB to the east. You have Timber Bend to the south, zoned R1. And then you have this large semi-agricultural / residential property zoned R1 to the west. This is a look at the layout of the 64 lots and common areas. The property would gain access via these two existing stub streets to the north from Whispering Pines, from Whispering Pines Boulevard. These two streets are existing going north into Whispering Pines. Those would be extended south into this subdivision. Then there would be this new street intersection near the southeast corner of the property, which would give the property its two connections to the arterial street system. There's a new retention pond over here in the northwest corner where drainage would flow before then outletting to the existing Whispering Pines Pond, which is in this area here before water then continues on its natural pattern moving west. The lots do all meet the minimum R2 standards for lot width, lot area, and other development standards, as well as the zoning commitments. As you may recall, these lots along the south line had a commitment to be both wider and larger than the rest of the lots in the subdivision, where this essentially doesn't technically abut Timber Bend because there's an intervening strip here, which is a driveway for the vapors, but it's basically adjacent to Timber Bend, which is zoned R1 and has the larger lots. But again, all of the lots do meet standards of the UDO as well as the higher standards of the zoning commitments that are in place. There's a look at the landscape plan with the required street trees or parkway trees, as the UDO calls them. So it does appear to be consistent with all the standards of the UDO, aside from the one waiver request, as well as being consistent with the zoning commitments that are in place. To address the waiver, The request is for a 52-foot right-of-way width for the new internal streets. This wouldn't have any impact on 625 East or on Whispering Pines Boulevard, where the property gains access on the north. This would just be for the new internal streets. So the town has several different street cross sections based on the zoning and the number of lots that would be served by a particular street. We have a 1A, a 1B, a 2A, and a 2B, which are basically just for local internal streets. And then we have, of course, other standards for larger collector and arterial streets. In this case, we're talking specifically about the town's 2A standard. Just to back up a little bit, when the petitioner filed this request, they originally requested a waiver in order for the improvements to match what's in the existing Whispering Pines neighborhood to the north, which actually has, I believe, a little bit wider street pavement, but it has narrower tree lawns and narrower sidewalks than the town's current standard. And that's likely because the existing Whispering Pines was initially approved and platted under county jurisdiction before being annexed into the town. And that waiver request would have been with a 50-foot right-of-way. The town's response was that we would rather see our standard be utilized for the actual improvements in the right-of-way. So going, from the center out, you have the street width, the curb, the tree lawn, and then the sidewalk. And then what we have behind the sidewalk is labeled as a utility strip. And I'm going to show you actually a picture here that helps. So this is the town standard for a 60-foot right-of-way for our 2A street. And so you'd have a 24-foot asphalt pavement, 2 feet of curb on each side, a 6-foot tree lawn, a 5-foot sidewalk, and then what we call a 5-foot utility strip. So that utility strip can be helpful to locate utilities, to provide additional space behind the sidewalk, and to keep utilities out closer to the street. It can be helpful for homeowners that the utilities then don't encroach as far into their yard. However, modern plats typically always include a utility easement in the front yard now that can accommodate utilities, much like this plat does. So this is what's actually being proposed today. So you'll see that the pavement is 12 and 12. That's 24, the same as the town standard. 2-foot curb on each side, 6-foot tree plot or tree lawn, 5-foot sidewalk. That all matches the town standard. The only difference is they're doing just a 1-foot, let's call it as it is here, utility strip behind the sidewalk, rather than the 5-foot for our standard. I show our 1A standard just to demonstrate that the town does have cross sections that we use sometimes that only have a 1-foot utility strip behind the sidewalk. And our Public Works Department has verified and confirmed that 1 foot is enough space for the town to adequately maintain that sidewalk in the future. So for that reason, the town was supportive of reducing this 5-foot utility strip down to the 1-foot strip that the petitioner has proposed. So that will allow the petitioner to have all their lots fit. And because there's a 20-foot, I think it's mentioned here, it's kind of hard to read, but there's a platted drainage and utility easement, which if I go back to the plat, of course, it's hard to see at this scale, but the right-of-way line basically is right here behind the sidewalk. Back to this first dashed line, that's 20-foot drainage and utility easement. So there's no concern on the town's part that there won't be adequate room to install and service utilities or to maintain the public sidewalk. And so for those reasons, the town is supportive of reducing the right-of-way width from 60 feet down to 52 feet. So we do support the waiver, and then we also recommend approval of the plat because we do believe it meets all other requirements of the UDO as well as the applicable commitments that were agreed to through the zoning process. So we recommend approval subject to these standard conditions, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that any of the commissioners may have.
So just to be clear, we're not talking about, the waiver is not to request that the street be narrower. It's that the easement space be smaller. That the
Correct. The
utility
street would
easement.
be, not that, I mean, not technically an easement per se, it would be the right of way.
Right of way,
which
yes.
Traditionally, we would allow utilities to enter into, to use, but because there's a 20-foot utility easement behind the right of way, there's not a need for that additional space.
Okay.
But again, to answer the question, we're not doing anything different to the road. The road remains the same width. curb to
Correct.
curb.
The asphalt curb to curb, the curb size, the tree lawn between the curb and the sidewalk, and the width of the sidewalk would all be exactly to the town standard.
And how does that compare to the width of the pavement in Whispering Pines?
I believe the pavement is a couple feet wider actually in Whispering Pines.
Are there any further questions for staff? I do have a question. How many people have signed up to speak on this other than the petitioner?
We have 3 people signed up.
Okay, we've had a request from the Vapors to be able to read into the record some objections they have to this plat. It's, I've read through it, and I believe they're correct. We normally allow 2 minutes per petitioner to do this. We also normally allow 10 minutes for the petitioner and the remonstrators to address this. I'm inclined to allow extra time to allow these to be read in, but I would ask that the Vapors keep it quick. We will be discussing all of this.
Question that I have is, and I haven't read these because they were just given to us. Does this information that they're going to read into this have anything to do with the plot approval?
Yes, they're making requests. They're making requests to the changes to the plat, is my understanding. Or they're wanting certain language added. And again, we'll discuss this prior.
So, can I ask, as staff, can you give us like what you've seen? Are these actionable?
So without going through point by point, I mean, but most of these, and I've had discussion with Kurt Vapor here in our office earlier today, as well as I think last week. We don't think these are things that need to be addressed on the plat in order for you to approve it. So
I'll hold then on that. I think that's good enough and wait till we get in discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions for staff? If there's no further questions, petitioner may begin.
Thank you. Melissa Gerard for Pulte Homes. I have Dave Compton from Pulte Homes here with me tonight, and also Lance Farrell and Parker Mays from Banning Engineering. I probably can't be as brief as Parker, but I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. I know we've all heard this a number of times, and there's not really a lot new here from the last time you saw it. I think more we've just put some meat on the bones, but the basic project is the same as you've seen for several months. And am I not on? Oh, my clicker. Okay, cool. It's the same as you've seen for several months, and I think as late as March. But I did want to briefly highlight, and I'll get back to that as well, in response to Mr. Zuzin's comments. I think it's our position that to the extent that any of these issues in the vapor letter are relevant still. Their construction plan details. They haven't identified any deficiencies in the plat or our compliance. The plat complies with your UDO. Staff has recommended approval. We have one waiver request, which I'll explain the need for that later on. But other than that, as you pointed out in your introduction, President Ransberg, it's a ministerial obligation to approve a compliant plat. This is the location for Whispering Pines. Paul did a good job identifying all these issues. This is a rendering of the current plat. It's a little prettier, I think, maybe than the actual plat document, but the only change really significantly to this layout, when we went to town council, the town council requested that those tan lots, originally there were 9 of them. They requested that we eliminate one of those tan lots and kind of relocate it up towards, I don't even know if I can point, up towards the north to that weird little common area that we had up in the north, and make these lots larger, 120 feet. So those, and it was 110 feet when we were last at the Plan Commission. Those are now 110 feet, the tan lots, to match sort of what the standard is in Timber Bend, or what.
And just so that for those who can't necessarily see the color difference, you're talking about the lots on the south side of the property.
Yeah, the ones that are colored kind of brownish, pinkish tan. Yeah. There are 5.33 acres of common area. That equates to about 16.57% open space. That's more than 2 times the standard in your ordinance for R2. I went a little bit further, or asked Parker, and we can thank Parker for these lovely drawings, to demonstrate what we're asking for in the waiver. These are all kind of to scale, and I've tried to line them up on top of each other so you can see what's different. So the top one is your 2A standard. Everything between, and the middle one is what we're doing in this subdivision, and then the bottom one is kind of what's at existing Whispering Pines. As you can see, everything between the red lines is exactly the same as your 2A standard. We're constructing all the hard infrastructure the same, including the 5-foot sidewalks and the 6-foot tree lawns, which are your current standards now. Then in behind those, which I don't know are really a standard in your ordinance, but as Paul pointed out, most modern plats include a drainage and utility easement beyond that. That's the green area that's shown there. The yellow area is the reduced utility strip. I don't even really know why we have utility strips anymore, because most of the utilities don't want to be in your right-of-way. They would rather be in private easements outside of the right-of-way, because if they're in the right-of-way, if you ever do any work in the right-of-way, you can force them to move at their expense. If they're in easements behind the right-of-way, then they have to be compensated. So they don't want to have to move their utilities at their expense. So that's why they make us put everything in easements anyway. The reason we need this is because we are matching those 2 stub roads at Whispering Pines Boulevard. So we have to kind of be the same width as them. But more importantly, probably, is that the utilities are already stubbed in there. So we've got to connect where the utilities go. And if we have a 10-foot wider, area, and then the 20-foot utility easement behind that, they're not going to match up right. So, so the only deviation from your 2A standard is the reduced utility strip that allows us to get from the 4 feet on each side, allows us to reduce the right-of-way from 60 to 52 feet. But I would also note that the utility strip in existing Whispering Pines is actually only 1 foot as well. Existing Whispering Pines has actually narrower sidewalks and narrower tree lawns, I think, as well. They're at 4-foot sidewalks and 5-foot tree lawns. So we think it's going to look better to have, and it's more ADA compliant as well, to have the 5-foot sidewalks and the larger tree lawns. So that's the request for the waiver. Mr. Vapor, I think, submitted comments, written comments to staff this morning. We submitted a written response this afternoon. I don't intend to get into too much detail on those unless you have questions or unless I need to on rebuttal. I would just stand on my written response, but I would say that none of these issues go to the compliance of our plat with the UDO standards. A lot of these issues were addressed. For the most part, these are just a renewal of the same issues that he raised on zoning, for which we addressed in written commitments where we could. He now wants more than what we gave in zoning, but they're the same comments and concerns. We are working with town staff intimately on some of these issues, and we will continue to work with town staff through the construction plan phase. Some of these issues, the drainage issues, et cetera, will be revisited as well when our construction plans come up through the TAC process. But again, they're not an identifiable reason to reject a compliant plat. If you have any questions, otherwise I'll save the rest of my time for rebuttal.
Okay. Thank you. Understand we have 3 people who have signed up. Well, let me back up a little. Is there anybody here who would like to speak in support of this petition? That usually gets done quicker. We'll now go to the people who've signed up.
First, we have Kurt Vapor.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Kurt Vapor, 4927 Silver Bell Drive in Plainfield, Indiana. My understanding of this meeting is it was to comment on the plat, and that's what I will do. We came up with 7 comments. I provide those 7 comments on this handout, and I will be as brief as I can to get through these 2 pages, if that's okay. Item 1. We appreciate the plat change to keep our historic lane untouched by Whispering Pines South Development. We don't want the appearance of our historic lane changed. We also want our lane to open directly onto 625 East and not open onto a Whispering Pines South acceleration lane for reasons of both safety and historic preservation. Item 2. We appreciate the Whispering Pines South plat change to eliminate the line of sight hazard at our lane's entrance to 625 East. Our interpretation of the plat is there are no trees between the walking trail on the west side of 625 East and the acceleration lane from the nearby Whispering Pines South exit onto 625 East. This design provides clear line of sight from Vapor Lane onto 625 East. However, we do request a plat change stating the area between the walking path and 625 East roadway is to be planted in grass or landscaping that doesn't obstruct Vapor Lane line of sight to the north. A note here is our line of sight has previously been obstructed by trees and foliage. This situation has previously been made tolerable by Avon schools, occasionally trimming back the foliage. Pulte has refused to help us with this line of sight problem, so we appreciate the change in the plat. Item 3, the Whispering Pines South exit lane onto 625 East doesn't meet Indiana Department of Transportation separation requirements between driveways. This will create hazardous conditions for the vapors when exiting our lane. And there's some numbers there from the NDOT requirements. I won't take the time to read those.
Appreciate that.
This is all right out of the NDOT published guidelines. Item 4, as part of the upzoning process, Pulte committed to build a 6-foot wooden privacy fence to improve the landscape transition from Pulte to Vapor property. However, Pulte has now refused to extend this privacy fence to existing vapor fence lines which define vapor property lines. This severely dampens the effectiveness of the fence as a landscape transition, and in our view, does not meet the intent of the agreement made during the zoning process. Vapors request plat changes showing the landscape transition provided by the privacy fence extend to vapor fence lines / property lines. We also request the easement we've been asked to provide for fence maintenance be added to the plat. We also request a plat change stating Whispering Pine South is responsible for privacy fence maintenance. Item 5, the plat in 2 places on vapor property states existing woodlands to remain. These comments are attendant to vapor property and should be removed. Vapor property and existing vapor trees are not bound in any way by the Whispering Pine South plat. Item 6, vapors petitioned during the upzoning process for the town of Avon to maintain our dam and drainage infrastructure through our property due to added stress from Whispering Pine South stormwater. This additional stormwater adds financial risk for vapors, risk the vapors have done nothing to cause. Vapors request a plat change stating Whispering Pine South stormwater will not flow onto vapor property. We also request a plat change stating vapors are in no way responsible for Whispering Pine South drainage problems. Item 7. During the upzoning process, vapors commented on the risk Whispering Pine South landscaping will cause our lane to flood. Currently, the sides of our lane hold a small amount of water when rainfall is heavy, but standing water never gets onto our lane's roadway. We request a plat change stating Whispering Pine South landscaping and stormwater will not cause flooding or water damage on our lane or any other part of vapor property. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with these objections, and we will appreciate a written response from Avon on these items.
Thank you. Who's next on the list?
Teresa Vapor.
I decline.
Okay, moving on.
And last we have Leslie Vapor Ratliff.
I also decline.
Okay, appreciate that. Would you like to respond, petitioner? And because we gave the vapors additional time, we will allow for additional time.
I don't think I'll need it, but we'll see how it goes. On the site distance issues, let me say that the trees that he's complaining about are existing trees that exist right now, which we are subject to commitment not to remove unless necessary for roadway improvements. I don't want to remove trees that might get me in trouble with some obligation to the town. Now, that said, there are going to be trees that need to be removed for roadway purposes or utility purposes. And we intend to replace those trees to meet the spirit of the commitments that we gave to the town. We are going to work with the Public Works Director to make sure that we are clear on all line of sight issues, and we have actually engaged Mr. Moore on that subject already. And I think he is satisfied in that regard, but I would note, and this is a comment I think with a lot of the vapors comments, I don't think they understand the distinction between the plat and the landscape plans. The landscape plans are things that we continue to refine. The TAC is going to get another obligation or opportunity to look at them. And that includes a variety of matters with regard to drainage, which Mr. Maddox will review on behalf of the town, with landscaping issues, with public safety issues, and that sort of thing. So those issues are going to be continued to refine, but the landscape plan is not part of the plat that you are approving tonight, or that we're asking that you approve tonight. Mr. Moore has not identified any line of sight or safety issues that we have in the current plat, and no revision to the plat is necessary. On the distance between the separation between our southern entrance drive and the Vapors driveway. County Road 625 East is not an NDOT regulated road. The NDOT standard does not apply. Our plat satisfies the town of Avon standards per staff, including Mr. Moore. The town of Avon's UDO actually requires that drive be exactly where it is, because the center line has to align with 625 East in the reserve at Bridgewater. We cannot move that road. It is necessary to be exactly where it is to meet that standard of the town's UDO. If we moved it further north away from the Vapors driveway, it would create more safety problems with the reserve at Bridgewater and whatever safety problems there may be with the alignment of the road. And I don't think there are any with the Vapors driveway. The Avon UDO, as I said, NDOT standard does not apply. The Avon UDO actually specifies a minimum offset for local streets of 125 feet. This isn't actually a street, it's just a driveway. But even if you use that standard, they are at about 200 feet, and we meet the Avon standard in that regard. I don't think it applies because it's dealing with two streets and not a driveway and a street. I've indicated in the letter I submitted, there's a picture that shows the distance and the compliance with the Avon UDO standard. On the privacy fence, let me first say that this exhibit or this little picture that's in this letter is exactly in the text of the written commitments. This is taken directly from the written commitments. We discussed both at this body and at the town council the privacy fence that would be granted, and this is what was agreed to as part of the commitments. I don't think it's fair to require, Mr. Vapor never objected to this picture that was included in the written commitments, although he had multiple opportunities to do so. And it's unfair right now to seek a second bite at that apple. With regard to the easement for the maintenance on the fence, let me first say that a plat only covers property within our boundary lines, right? I can't create easements on property outside of what we own or control. We have provided common area that's sufficient to maintain the fence on our side. I can't by plat create an easement on Mr. Vapor's property for the maintenance of the fence on his side. He will have to give us a private easement if he wants us to take care of that maintenance on that fence. So that's something, again, outside of the plat process, because we can't plat and we can't put easements on property outside of the plat that we control. The comment with regard to existing woodlands to remain, again, that's just some language on a landscape plan that went beyond the limits of what we could print it on. We legally don't have the right to do anything to any trees or woodlands on their property, and nothing in the plat can change that fact. They control their property, we control our property. If they want them removed, they can remove them. If they don't have to remove them. Although I would note that the existing Whispering Pines commitments that discourage the removal of trees do affect some portions of the Vapor property, because it was originally part of the rezoning at the county that those commitments came into play. So the next one is the dam and the downstream drainage infrastructure from the Whispering Pines Pond. This is a matter between the town and the Vapors. Mr. Moore has met with the Vapors on site. He has offered terms for the town to assume the maintenance of the drainage infrastructure. The Vapors rejected those terms. Pulte has made some commitments concerning the maintenance of the downstream or the drainage infrastructure in connection with our zoning commitments, we're not willing to do any more than what we've given in our zoning commitments. In addition, I would note that, and there's a picture in the response that I gave you, the watershed for the water that goes through that part of the Vapor property is much larger than just the Whispering Pines, our little platted area. It includes large sections of existing Whispering Pines and parts of the county subdivisions to the east as well. So it's not fair to ask Pulte to assume all of that obligation. We've agreed to the extent that there's not a legal drain or something created that we will help with part of the maintenance of the outfall structure. But that's in the commitments and we will abide by those, but we're not willing to give anything more in that regard. In addition, I would note that Pulte will be adding another pond, which will greatly reduce the stormwater maximum discharge from the existing pond, which actually was designed to accept the outflow from our subdivision as well. And all town drainage standards will be met. This again is not a revision to the plat. It's a drainage thing that will be continued to be looked at and refined as construction plans are approved. I'm sure Mr. Maddox will scrutinize our drainage items as well. And in fact, he's already made several requests for additional information to Banning. And then the final comment is with regard to their driveway. Banning tells me that this particular area drains, the Vapor property drains to the north. It doesn't drain south. So they are actually draining onto us. We are not discharging onto them. So it's exactly the opposite. And again, the trees in this area are existing. So if those are impeding drainage, they're existing and we're not supposed to be removing them. All construction plans and landscape plans will continue to be reviewed by town staff and Crossroads with respect to drainage, and Pulte will meet all town drainage standards. No revisions to the plat are necessary on any of these items. I would specifically note that the Vapors have not taken issue with the waiver request, which is internal to the Whispering Pines South subdivision. So I don't think that there's any objection to that. And with that, we would suggest that the plat complies with all town standards. Staff supports that interpretation, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions if you have any.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the petitioner or the Vapors? Okay, we'll get into discussion. If we need clarification from either, we will certainly ask you to come forward.
So a question for staff here, and I appreciate the explanation in your report here, because when I came in, I was confusing right away with street widths, and so you helped correct me on my thinking there. So really, it sounds like this utility strip would be town property or town maintenance. But now utilities are looking to, from what we hear on the petitioner, and appreciate that explanation, education on that, utilities rather put utilities in non-easement, a non-right-of-way area here. So that utility strip, is that like a holdover from former development here, and where utilities have looked to get away from that, working with developers?
I don't know if I'd say it's just a holdover. I mean, I don't know if I'd able to say that the town sees it as completely unnecessary. There could be situations where maybe there's not as much easement provided, or there's not as much space, depending on, the zoning district and the front setback requirement. There could be times when that would be necessary. But as mentioned, generally, the utilities aren't using that space for the most part.
So the granting of the waiver, if we would grant that, the town really is able to get what is needed to maintain the right of way. So the town doesn't really lose that capability.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All the comments that were just made by Mr. Vapor as well as Pulte, do those comments have anything to do with this waiver that they're requesting? Because the waiver is on the internal streets, correct?
Correct.
That's how I see it too, is that the waiver is completely and entirely segregated from the other issues that were raised by the vapors. And just for clarification, Mr. Taylor, we need to address the waiver first before we move on to the plat approval. Okay. Well, then let's go ahead and talk about the waiver. I think staff and the petitioner did a very good job of explaining why it's necessary. The fact that it's not going to impact, they're not asking for a narrower street is good. That was the first thing that came to mind when I saw that, but the fact that it has to do with this quirky little utility right-of-way thing. I don't see a reason to not grant the waiver request.
Does the town of Avon have any standards that include a 13-foot road width that is in the current neighborhood?
Just a moment, and I will answer your question.
That was the only difference I noticed, that these roads were essentially 2 feet narrower than the rest of the neighborhood, with it based on the 2A standard.
No, we do not appear to have a standard that would match existing Whispering Pines.
But that was done under jurisdiction of the county, correct?
That's
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have any residential roads that are wider than 24 feet? For the actual asphalt width for residential use?
We should, we have, because our 1B and 2B standards both require wider pavement. And those are used typically with higher zoning districts where there's, where the lots are smaller and there's the expectation that there'll be more on-street parking required or needed, utilized.
Okay. So what is the typical expected parking on the road for a 24-foot width? Is that just park on one side, or what's the standard understanding?
Yes, for the 2A standard that would be applied here, it's anticipated that it could accommodate parking on one side of the street and still have vehicles pass, 2 vehicles pass on the remaining street pavement.
Okay.
Any further discussion on the waiver request? If there's no further discussion, we'll take a motion.
I just want to make one comment before we do that. Regarding the private drive of the vapors, that is one way for them to get to their property. There is another way to get to their property, and that is through the Timber Bend subdivision. There is an easement or a right-of-way or whatever the proper terminology is, I think right next to the Whipple property, that they can get to their property by coming through Timber Bend and getting to their property. So to me, they have 2 access points. And no one's even talked about the second one through this whole discussion.
Can I speak to that, Mr. Kazan?
Not yet, sir. No, sir.
That's all I
Okay.
have.
Any further question, any further discussion about the waiver request? If there's no further discussion, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. I move that we approve MAPP 2507 Waiver A, a request to waive Avon UDO 7.21E to allow for a 52-foot right-of-way width for internal streets, where the town's 2A standard requires a 60-foot right-of-way of width. Since it has satisfied all the requirements for waivers under state law and subject to the approved findings of fact.
I'll second.
Having had a motion and a second, we'll now take a vote.
Guckenberger,
4.
Reed,
4.
Rockabrand,
4.
Kaufman, Susan,
4.
Ransberg.
4. Having taken a vote, the waiver is granted, and we now move on to the approval of Whispering Pines South preliminary plat. I appreciate the Vapors. They've been very involved in this from day one and have been very proactive, which I appreciate very much. But I do think petitioner has a point on several of these, and that a lot of what's being addressed is not something that we would consider tonight. These are things that would come into play when we're looking at proposed landscaping. Some of the things, for instance, on number 3, 625 is not under NDOT jurisdiction, therefore that doesn't apply. So I think that most of what is on the Vapors concerns are not things that would be addressed this evening. That's how I'm looking at it. Not that they can't be addressed in the future, but just that tonight's not the night to address them.
So will final plans come through this committee, or
Yes.
the final plat with landscape and everything? Okay.
No, the final plat is approved administratively based on being generally consistent and compliant with what you approved tonight.
But we
The
will see
president of the
this.
commission signs it, but it will not come back before this
For the
body.
committee. So this is the last opportunity we have to discuss those concerns, right?
You wanted to say something, Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, the issue, you heard a reference to construction process, and that process is the permitting process. Those matters would not come back to the plan commission, but
Okay.
they would be handled by staff.
I stand corrected.
Yeah, but you were right. We just need to think about how that works. So if the plat is approved by you all, then we move to the construction process, at which time the developer has to then have all their detailed plans approved for drainage and for compliance, and the roads, again, very detailed plans that have to be approved. I also think that, as we have discussed before, you and I have discussed before, that when you have a plat, your job is to say, the question is, does the plat before you comply with our ordinance? That's the issue, and that's why it's viewed as a non-discretionary decision by you. And so the fact that, with all due respect to the Vapors, the fact that someone has objections to what you require or wish that you required other things is not really an issue before you. Because the law says you have to have a concrete set of standards for a plat, not only that it's specific enough, but also it is one that can be understood by developers, and they have to then design to comply with it. And so what you've heard the petitioner say is kind of the same thing, which is nothing in those concerns address whether the plat complies with the ordinance. So I would remind you that, your task is not to ask whether everyone agrees. It's very simply, does it meet our ordinance? And if there are other issues or concerns that people have outside of that, I think you are very limited at this stage of what you do. In the same respect, if there are issues in the construction phase about whether the construction plans comply with all of your approvals, commitments, rezone, and plat, those are going to be dealt with by your staff. So, Andrew, I appreciate your question. It is the last time you would see it, but it's not the last time the town would be involved in that process. Again, to ensure compliance with the approvals made by the town council and by you, and to comply with our ordinances.
And would it be appropriate to say that going forward, the Vapors should continue to work closely with the town staff on their concerns?
Right, and it sounds like that there may be issues that are in negotiation with the developer and the Vapors, and maybe the town and the Vapors, and those should continue and those issues will need to be resolved, but that doesn't necessarily go to you all as the plan commission. It's just kind of outside your job.
Thank you for that clarification, as always, Mr. Taylor.
So since we approved the waiver, and that seems to address even the one thing that would not comply to the ordinances, now that unless we find something else that isn't in compliance with the ordinances, makes it ministerial. So I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I move that we approve MAPP 2507 waiver A request to waive Avon UDO 7. Sorry, reading the wrong thing. I move that we approve MAPP 2507 Whispering Pine South preliminary plat, a request to divide 32.16 acres into 64 single-family lots, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report, since it has satisfied all the requirements for a major subdivision plat under state law and subject to the approved findings of fact.
Having had a motion and a second, we'll now take a vote.
Kaufman,
4.
Reed, Rockabrand, 4, Zuzen,
4.
Guckenberger,
Or,
Ransberg,
4. Motion carries. Preliminary plat is approved. Moving on to continued new business, Ray Skillman Automotive of Avon, DPR 2508. It looks like we've got 2 waivers with this one.
So I want to start by saying you received a copy of a secondary plat for Ray Skillman in your packets that went out inadvertently. They filed a final plat, which, as we just talked about, the final plats don't come before you. So yes, they filed it, but it got stuck in your packets by mistake. We're not going to be discussing the Ray Skillman plat that looks like this. Only the larger set of. Oh, you did? Oh, I'm sorry. Paul took it out. It wasn't out of my packet, so apologize for the confusion. Okay, so a few months ago, we saw the plat petition for the southeast corner of US Highway 36 and County Road 900 East. It is the southeast corner, will be known as Ray Skillman Mazda. It is currently 6 acres, zone C2, and it is in tiers 1 and 2 of the US Highway 36 overlay. The parcel is currently unimproved. I just mentioned it was part of a plat to subdivide into 2 blocks and 2 lots, and this will be on one of the lots being lot 1 of that subdivision. The site's also gone through the BZA for 2 cases. The first of which was a special exception to have automobile sales within the US Highway 36 overlay tier 1. And then the second was a variance of development standards to allow the building setback to be approximately 250 feet back from US 36. And then to have more than 2 rows, or actually to allow for 6 rows of parking in front of the building. As the car dealership, you'll see further west of this site, they all have the same variances for setback and for parking rows. There'll also be 2 waivers that I will get to tonight. One is kind of a bundle of waivers for the design of the building, and then the second one is for foundation planting along the frontage of the building facing 36. This is the subject site, so it's outlined of US 36, 900. This is the site here, and it was part of a larger plat that came down like that. And then there are 6 car dealerships to the west along the south side of US 36. This is a zoning map of the site. It's zoned C2, and automobile sales are permitted in the C2 with a special exception. And again, that special exception's already been granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals. This is the site plan for the site. The dealership building will be centralized in the middle of the site with the dealership operations on the north side of the building, and then the service center on the south side of the building, kind of as you see most dealerships set up. Again, this setback, the variance was to have a 250-foot setback when 125 is the limit, and then to have 6 rows of parking out front when 2 rows are normally the limit. Surrounded by commercial, except the property immediately to the east is undeveloped currently. It is not within the area retail of the comprehensive plan, but it is immediately adjacent to it, and extending that comprehensive bubble of area retail into this property is logical, and that's what we use to determine that the comprehensive plan is being met for this site. Aside from the waivers that we're going to get to, this is consistent with the UDO. And for development standards, and then we'll get to the design standards as well. This is the list of the design standards that the building that they have requested for the building. And it does look like a lot, and I understand that. But we'll kind of dive into it. I didn't put this list in your staff report. We kind of looked at the building as one whole development and style, as opposed to narrowing down and getting into the weeds of each individual item. These are the waivers, and those are in your staff report. I mean, the findings for the waiver, those are in your staff report, and I've just listed what the petitioner has indicated as a response for each of the waivers. Pretty standard responses indicating that it would be a car dealership, and it's standard across normal dealership development that they have to meet a standard that the brand puts on them that they are not allowed to vary from. This is the building elevations, the top being the north, which would face US 36, mostly windows and then metal panels. And then you'll see the sides with the service bay doors. I did put in what they submitted to us as a concept plan elevation. You'll see a lot of windows and then some metal panels. We generally are supportive of design waivers for the dealerships. The 6 that are to the west of here all receive design waivers for their buildings, and none of them meet any of the standards of the US 36 overlay. I've gone ahead and taken some snapshots of the existing dealerships, just so you can get a flavor of the buildings that have been approved for the dealership kind of area along US 36. We put in here that the intent and the purpose of the overlay is to preserve aesthetic qualities, and we believe while it doesn't specifically meet our standards as they're laid out, it does have a nice design and a good design for an automobile dealership. It is consistent with the other waivers that we have approved for dealerships to the west. Also, because we've allowed it by the variance to sit further back from US 36, the appearance of it along US 36 is not as imposing or striking as a lot of the other buildings adjacent to the US 36. So the architecture right from the right-of-way line is not as detailed. It kind of has to sit back and pop more with the windows and the metal and just the aesthetics of it adjacent to the cars. It's a different kind of look, and we get that. Then I would like to go into the development standards waiver, which is the foundation plantings adjacent to the front of the building. This is the landscape plan, and this is it's cut in half so that we have a north and a south. So this will be the north side, 36 at the north end. And the building in here is where the foundation planting has not been shown. And we've struggled a bit since I've been here and understanding the foundation planting section of the ordinance, because when we talk about it, people keep showing us sites that don't have the foundation planting, and we couldn't find variances or waivers for it. And then we finally figured it out in that the old zoning ordinance allowed the Plan Commission to adopt an alternate landscaping plan as part of the approval without saying the word waiver or saying the word variance. So like the building across the street, well, diagonally across the street, the one that has crumble cookie and who else is in there?
Chicken salad chick.
I don't know if it's that, but that tenant does not have any. And that's the one that kept getting tossed in my face, is saying, well, they don't even have any. And so now we figured it out that the old ordinance allowed just an alternate plan. And that's what was being approved as through the development plan process. Now they require a waiver to do the same thing that had been done. In this case, the purpose of the foundation plantings is to make commercial properties look more appealing, to soften hard lines, that sort of thing. In the case of an auto dealership, because it's so far set back and it has the glass and the metal panels in front of it, we're not as concerned about the foundation planting in front of the building, again, because the bottom of the building won't be seen from US 36. And through this landscaping plan, they are not reducing the amount of landscaping required. They have distributed across the rest of the site. So they're not asking for a waiver of the number of plantings, just that they would not have to put it adjacent to the building along this frontage here. So because it's so far set back and they are not reducing the amount of landscaping, we are supportive of that waiver as well. And if those two waivers are approved, the DPR would meet standards of the UDO, and we would recommend approval of that.
Questions for staff?
So I do have a couple questions. So you brought up the other car dealerships in that. So I just want to make sure no previous decision by the commission sets a precedent for any current case. Is that
That's
correct?
absolutely correct.
So while those were approved, that's not a precedent that requires approval because those were approved.
That's correct.
Okay. When you were talking with the petitioner, did they show you materials that they would like to use as an alternative to our ordinances? Because I know in past, when we've talked to dealerships, one of the things that was brought forward is they're bringing in superior materials or materials that would enhance the development along 36 as opposed to being all masonry. So like the metal panels and the glazing.
So they've showed us this elevation and they provided to us what the materials are going to be, which are generally glass and metal. While it doesn't meet our standards for masonry and that sort of thing, we think the design is still a superior design for the type of building that it is, that we're
So-
not losing heightened architectural like requirements. It's a different kind of building. for this
It's not
type of
a
use.
compromise of architectural integrity, I guess you would say.
Yeah,
So they're asking us to give a waiver against the ordinance without us seeing the materials that they plan to use. And that's where, I guess and I've seen it enough where and we see these developments, so I get that, but it's like petitioners bring them examples of that to help support their argument on why we would enforce or want to see our ordinances followed as opposed to a different, more aesthetically pleasing material. And I'm assuming that too, that you got these are the design standards that they can't deviate, otherwise they can't develop the with the development here. They got to follow these development standards, design standards
So, well, they have to meet our design standards if the waiver's not
of
approved,
the car dealership.
the
though.
car dealership.
Yeah.
As far as materials go, I wasn't aware that you had materials brought into you, or I would have
We-
recommended they do
It doesn't
that.
happen every time, but it happens regularly.
Okay.
Just ask for it every, and I think the last one
Understood.
was before you got
Yeah.
to, came to Avon.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I looked over the materials that they're proposing, and I don't know that I saw any issues with it, but I understand your
I'll
concern.
ask the petitioner for
Mhm,
more
sure.
details. Thank you.
Any further questions for staff?
My only question is, this project was approved in the past and it expired now?
So, yeah, I neglected to mention that. This project was approved in 2015, and the waivers for the building materials were also approved at that time. But it was not developed within the 1-year period, so it did expire.
So really nothing has changed from that approval, is it safe to say?
The scope of the approvals changed because they were proposing 2 dealerships now, and this is shrunk into 1. But otherwise, I mean, the building placement's changed a little, but otherwise it's not changed.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? We'll have the petitioner come forward.
Good evening. Derek Snyder with Crossroads Engineers, 115 North 17th Avenue, Beach Grove, Indiana. I'm here on behalf of Ray Skillman Realty to request development plan approval of case number DPR 2508. I'm joined here tonight by Kevin Aaron, controller for Ray Skillman Auto Group, and Tom Montgomery with Montgomery Architecture. Linda did a great job, so I will probably breeze through many of these slides to kind of get into the meat of the request, which is the waivers. Seems to be kind of the biggest question. So, project site located on US 36 between County Road 800 East and Ronald Reagan Parkway. More specifically, at the southeast corner of 900 East and US 36. The yellow line that you see there is kind of the plat list, which is the companion petition that was filed with the DPR. As Linda indicated, the project is zone C2 and within the tiers 1 and 2 of the US 36 overlays, and that applies to the Mazda, which is the bulk of the DPR. So as indicated, this is kind of, for lack of a better term, car dealership row, essentially. So we have six car dealerships to the west. As you can see here, the proposed Ray Skillman Mazda, which is located on the southeast corner, as Linda had indicated, the setback variance will allow for 250 feet, would allow for the building to align with the other dealerships, and that was granted through the BZA. This is the proposed layout of kind of the overall commercial subdivision. Again, that NAPF application was filed concurrent with the DPR. So the proposed Mazda dealership would be located on lot 1, outlined in red, and then block A there in blue, as well as lot B, which is outlined in orange, would be undeveloped and could be developed in the future under the current zoning standards. And then the existing Ray Skillman Center is included in this plat. Stormwater detention would be provided in the southeast corner. There's actually an existing detention pond there, and we would expand upon that to provide stormwater detention for the development. So this is a blow-up, enhanced view of the site plan for the Mazda. So the property, as indicated, the front setback, the variance allowed for the front of the building to align with the other dealerships, and the variance for the number of parking rows in front of the building. In addition, we have our access, pedestrian access from public sidewalks along US 36 and 900 East. So the main pedestrian routes from those thoroughfares to the front of the building are shown. Vehicular access to the property would be obtained off of County Road 900 East, as well as, and this is the south half of the proposed site plan, as well as a relocated drive off of Kingston Street. So as stated, the majority of the parking in front of the building would be used for vehicle display inventory, as well as some new car customer parking. And then we would anticipate that the parking in the southern half of the building, or the lot, would be some inventory, as well as new car customer, maintenance and service customers, et cetera. And then this is just a enlarged view of the access. As you may recall, a waiver was granted for the driveway separation as part of the primary plat, NAP 24-10. Actually, not 24-10, I had the number mixed up. Regardless, the access shown on the DPR construction plans is consistent with the NAP waiver. And then again, this is just an enlarged view of the landscape plan, which was included in the staff report. To Linda's point, all of the landscaping that is required by ordinance is provided, but it has been kind of shifted around away from the front of the building with the intent that that wider sidewalk adjacent to the building provides an enhanced pedestrian route to the front, what will be the main pedestrian entry for new car services and et cetera. And then the next slide shows the southern half of the property again, compliance with the UDO as it relates to landscape quantities and location, with the exception of the frontage directly adjacent to US 36. So this time, I'm going to welcome Tom Montgomery of Montgomery Architects to come up and discuss the architectural building design.
I'm Tom Montgomery of Montgomery Architects, located at 6235 North Shore Drive, Unionville, Indiana. This is it's about a 40,000 square foot car dealership. The service department is in the rear. It's approximately 14,700 square feet. There's a second floor, approximately 9,500 square feet. The majority of the building, the showroom portion is on the north side of the building, which is along 36. This is Mazda's prototypical design. It's provided by Mazda. They like to stay with their brand. This is what everyone sees throughout the United States. And this is what the owner is requesting to build. The materials are, this is white aluminum composite material. It's like a 4mm aluminum panel on like a plastic substrate. You see it on all the car dealerships up and down the road. This is a black aluminum composite material that surrounds this black frame curtain wall with clear glass. Clear glass is used to see within the building. At the bottom of the building is a black ephes or drive-it. Kind of is a frame of the lower glass that goes into the showroom. On the right side of the building is this is the new car delivery, where there's 3 service doors that enter on the side. And it's also composed of white aluminum composite material and the black ephes on the bottom. This is just the front elevation. The top one's the front elevation of what I just showed you. The rendering was actually prepared by Mazda, and it's identical to what this elevation is right here. On the left-hand side is where the cars enter the service reception, And it also has the white aluminum composite material and the black ephes on the bottom. And this is the rear elevation, the south elevation, the rear elevation of the service department. It will be, what we're proposing is painted precast concrete panels. It would be like a light gray, more of a medium gray. We also carry the ACM and the ephes around the back as well, where the new car delivery, the service reception, jet out from the building. These are the side elevations. This is the west elevation that faces Toyota. You see the service department on the right, and the showroom area on the left, and this is the east elevation, same type of elevation. And these are the exterior materials. Looks like a white ACM, black ACM. There's some ephes material. This is a gray ephes, but we're proposing to use a paint that matches the gray ephes. So the service department will be similar to this color. That's all I have.
So the materials you just talked about, are those the same materials you have at your Hyundai dealership? Right down the street?
They are. They use that same material exactly, the aluminum composite material. They use the bronze color on that.
Thank you.
I think they use ephes as well on that project, and I think they use painted precast on the service department as well.
Thank you. Is there anybody present? Is there anybody who has signed up to speak to remonstrate against this petition?
No, there is not.
Okay. I'm assuming you do not wish to rebut the lack of remonstration?
No, I would just say if there are any questions as to the waiver requests, we're happy to answer any of those. I know, had we been aware of the material request, I certainly would have come prepared with some samples, I think, in hand. But to Tom's point, so we did the civil design on the Hyundai dealership, and it's been several years. I do recall that there were waivers requested for that, and if I recall correctly, Tom's right. Building materials are pretty similar. I'm not 100% sure. We're not architects, but I kind of recall having very similar discussions wherever it was 8 years ago.
Okay, thank you. Discussion?
Yeah, so the question then for staff, if the waiver is approved, the materials that are used still, or is there still some requirement though that materials would meet the ordinances as far as like, is the ephes material an accepted building material? I can't remember off the top of my head.
US 36.
I mean, we've seen it, so. Is that,
You're talking about the composite aluminum?
I'm just, any materials that are used, the waiver wouldn't relieve them of meeting any other requirements. So would the materials they use still have to meet any other requirement of the ordinance? Because it's just masonry that we're.
Well, no, the other list of, page 4 of your staff report, where it lists all of the actual waivers. It's not just masonry. They're talking about plane projections and uninterrupted walls.
Yes.
And they're requesting waivers of that.
So I'm just going with building materials though right now, that the waiver is request to be relieved of following the masonry requirement.
Correct.
But any of the materials that are used still have to be, well, do we have any other ordinances that, no, I'm saying that, thinking is there a requirement on the type of materials they're talking about? Or are those in our ordinances as being approved, like ephes
All of the
And,
materials they're talking about, they are in lists of what's allowed and what's not.
Okay,
Yes.
so they still have to follow that.
Yes.
And if they don't follow that, then they're back here asking for another waiver.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was asking. All right, thank you.
You got there.
So I have some questions about how the town is going with potentially using Kingston as a secondary thoroughfare behind the building. And so the front facade, I think, looks great on 36. It's architecturally interesting, it's got variations, but the back of that building is a precast concrete building, right? Just square block, straight walls, painted gray,
Can you pull that up?
as plain as can be essentially. And I think that does not meet the intent of what a secondary thoroughfare should look at. And essentially, you're looking at the back half of that building, all the white is just precast concrete. And there's nothing architecturally interesting about that. So I think that, and that's where you're getting the 100-foot length without projections, and you're putting a lot of waivers in to get the back half of the building to look ugly so the front half can look good, essentially. And I don't know if that meets the intent of what we're doing here.
So is your question regarding the rear or the sides or both?
Yeah, both. I mean, that whole back half of that building is what you're going to see on Kingston and on that brand new extension of 800 East, I think it is.
Mhm.
You're going to see this big white wall, or I guess light gray wall, and it's not nearly as architecturally interesting as the front of the building. And is there a way we can wrap some of that interesting architecture around the back sides where it's going to be a secondary thoroughfare on the back of that building?
So the answer to your question about Kingston Street is yes, that's still the long-term plan for that to be a secondary thoroughfare, essentially. And where Kingston Street is turns into Tier 3, so it's, I guess at Kingston Street, I think is where it turns into Tier 3. So I understand your point. I actually went and double-checked the Toyota dealership to see what it was facing. So I brought these pics in. So the top picture is Toyota's full wall that faces 900. This is kind of the front of it. So this piece up here is this. And then that's their full wall with essentially no windows, no anything of what they're going to be facing. So I was trying to compare it to what was out there and what it was across the street from it. And then this back piece here is the rear facing Kingston of the Toyota dealership. And the only thing interesting in that elevation is an overhead door. I realize that this building will have 3 street elevations, but
Correct.
the goal of the architectural standards and the US 36 standards is how it looks from 36, and that's where they focused. I would not consider, get back to the side. I actually thought these sides were pretty good for, normally we just get one giant wall, and then this is actually broken up a little bit. So I guess I didn't see it from the point of view you were seeing it from, but I understand your comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at least some articulations would be nice, wouldn't it? Give it a little bit more interesting look.
Their thing too is like knowing that they have 3 streets to deal with, maybe the landscaping to obstruct the view of the rear of the building. So there's more landscaping. So as we're moving the foundation planning, so I appreciate that you've talked about where you're still doing the planning, number of plantings, just not on the foundation in front. Getting more plantings in the back, because I don't think you're displaying, I don't know, you can tell me, displaying cars for sale in the back as much as on 36. That's where you want your inventory to be seen.
So this is the back of the building. They are putting the foundation planting around them.
So along Kingston Street though.
Kingston Street is here. The landscaping is there. This is 900 with this landscaping and then interior here.
So,
and then the foundation planting.
right. I guess my point to what Andrew was talking about is that you got this wall back here. And we're all talking about, it's like, okay, it's on the street. There should be some articulation. If there's not articulation, I'm saying, do we get more street plantings to obscure that view because the inventory back here, I'm assuming, is for availability, the display is up front on 36. That's the reason for 6 rows of parking.
But we've also got, I'm assuming some of the relocation of landscaping along the front of the building, some of that has happened, moved it to the back, because it looks like there's pretty intensive tree planting planned along Kingston Street. Am I reading that correctly?
So the west, along the west side of the building, there's that landscape island in the middle. So I believe that I had a slide in the PowerPoint that showed, I think it was 3 or 4, there's a handful, almost half a dozen additional trees that have landscape island in the middle of the parking area that would basically separate that building elevation from 900 East, in addition to the perimeter parking and the parkway trees, as well as there are foundation shrubs along that facade. And then along the portion that faces Kingston Street, there are foundation plantings there. There is an overhead door. That's the second access in and out of that service area. And then perimeter parking, shrubs, trees, and parkway plantings along Kingston as well.
I would note on the site plan, you can see that this isn't one large wall. It's just that the elevations show it, but it's broken up into different planes here. So it's not, this one is, but it comes up here, comes further west, and then gets to the front of the building. And then the rear has 4 different planes breaking it up.
How tall is that building? Is it 30 feet?
23 feet in the back, 26 feet in front.
Okay.
Just a reminder, we have 2 waivers to address first before we can do plat approval.
So I want to add that, I mean, I've been looking for this development for a long time. When Ray Skillman first came and had proposed multiple car dealerships. And I missed the trees that were on the corner of that property. They got, and maybe it predates you guys, but so I thought those dealerships going in there. So it's good to see a dealership coming in there to the right place with all the other dealerships. And I think that was one of the objectives, is trying to keep the dealerships on 36 in that area and not spread out throughout the town. So I think it's a good place, and it's good to see another Ray Skillman business come to town here.
And I appreciate also that instead of just asking for a reduction of landscaping, you've just reallocated it on the property, which I appreciate that, so.
Yeah, and I think Linda made a great point that with that additional setback, the foundation plantings right up against the building, and the amount of trees and the amount of inventory, you wouldn't see those plantings from 36 anyway. You would almost have to be in the parking lot to see them. So kind of distributing them elsewhere through the site, I feel like also kind of draws a little more attention to them. As that 200-foot setback to those smaller shrubs and trees against the building that may not be quite as visible.
Any further questions for the petitioner or further discussion before we address waiver A, noting that waiver A is actually a collection of waiver requests. Perhaps it would be good for us to just review what those are.
Yeah, from a waiver A is what I'm concerned about. The waiver B, I think you've done a great job with landscape plan. I think it breaks it up. It provides flow through the site. I disagree with making those big waivers for the back 2/3 of that building and the large surface areas there that could be architecturally more interesting with just a few modifications. I don't know what would I propose. I'm not an architect, but it is a huge waiver for a prominent building on 36.
If
Well, I'm not going to make suggestions. I just.
We don't
I-
negotiate
a
designs.
standard, you know, if you were to wrap similar materials around the entire building, I know that's a lot more expensive. I respect that. Or something comparable that would provide more architectural interest, I think that would be a benefit. And I think by doing all of these waivers, we make no requests for any additional changes to design. So, or no requirements for it. So that's why I would hesitate on waiver 1.
So
or
we've
waiver A.
got, the first A1 is that is the masonry issue. 80% masonry is required on the front and 50% on the side facade, and they're asking for none, which they've already done that. The second one has to do with wall plane projections. Our standards are requiring projections every 40 feet with a depth of at least 3 feet, and they're asking, and a minimum width of 40 feet. They're asking to allow for an uninterrupted wall longer than 50 feet. They're asking to provide for facades greater than 100 feet in length without projections or recesses. Basically, what we're seeing is a request for minimal articulation, I guess. To provide for walls without repeating patterns. To provide for facades without architectural features repeating horizontally or vertically, and to provide for east and west facades without 2 separate materials. I also understand that when dealing with the car dealerships and really any kind of franchise, restaurants, whatever, corporate has their model and they are like, this is how we do it. And sometimes there's flexibility and sometimes there's not. Costco worked with us quite well in meeting our standards, came to us with their corporate model. We said we want more masonry. They worked with us on that. I'm not sure how car dealerships think.
I understand the branding more on the side that faces
Mhm.
Rockville Road, but I don't know why the exceptions are needed for the other sides.
Can I ask one question, something that's kind of popped in my head, and I'm not an architect, so I didn't study this section of the UDO very closely. I know there's the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and I think the cutoff line for tier 1 and tier 2 kind of goes through a part of the building, correct? Is the architectural standards that the waivers are being requested from, are those applicable to both tier 1 and 2, or is it being applied because the building is in both tiers, so it's the higher of the two?
That's a good question.
It's being applied as all tier 1
Because
through the
it's-
sides, yeah.
If this was entirely in tier 2, would the same standards apply?
There are different standards for tier 1, tier 2, and don't have them memorized to explain right now. So it's based on tier 2. Okay, we did break it up into tier 1 and tier 2, I apologize. So tier 1 is 80% all the way around, tier 2 is 80 front and 50 side, so that's how we broke it down.
So, it's our, I guess, it's our way to run the business of the Plan Commission. We have suggested motions from staff, but we don't have to do those motions as staff has suggested, right?
Right.
Look at, okay.
That's correct.
So we could break these down, make a motion on each one as a separate waiver,
Right.
which I think the thing that I'd bring up is if there's one or more of these that we object to, I would bring up the petitioner because they may want to have a continuance to address that rather than be denied the waiver.
I was thinking the same thing. I would not object if there were only one or if there were only 2 or 3 that they were bundled together, but we've got 7. And it looks like, I think some of these we might say, yeah, we're good with that. And others we want to have a more thorough discussion or have the petitioner come back with a revised plan. So I think it would behoove us to go through the 7, see where we are, and that way the petitioner is more informed in terms of, you know, it's not just waiver A, it may be a 1 and a 3 and 4, but the rest we're fine with. And I'm just example, I'm not saying that's the case. So I think maybe we should look at where are we on each of these waivers. I agree that waiver 2 or waiver B, I think they've made a very good argument for that. And I think I'm not hearing any strong objection to that. It's waiver A that could be an issue. In parts, because there's multiple parts to it. So generally speaking, what I'm hearing is the issue of primarily the south wall, the sides also, but the south wall, the south half of the building.
Lost all its architectural standards based on the front half of the building.
And
Again, I'm only one commissioner here,
sure.
so.
I do have a question. So on all of these requests, uninterrupted wall longer than 50 feet, facades greater than 100 feet in length without projections or recesses, does that apply primarily to the back half of the building?
I think the front's fine.
Is-
There's plenty of projections and
On
changes,
the,
yeah.
yeah, so this is mostly, we're looking at the back half of the building. Okay. The only one, so would you say that the first one having to do with masonry is probably the only one that applies to the front half of the building? Okay, and everything else is about the back half of the building?
I didn't look at the front yet. The front has so much variation, I just assumed it met all the other criteria, all the other ordinances.
It's just the materials?
Right, that's right.
Okay, okay.
I mean, again, number 1 is 80% masonry on the front, 50% masonry on the side. This is no masonry.
No masonry anywhere.
So,
Anywhere.
right, and which would be consistent with the car dealerships and the materials that are being used. So while that didn't set a precedent by doing that, it still would make it look like the other.
And we do want
dealerships.
consistency,
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of that. But that doesn't address your question,
It does not.
which has to do with not that there's no masonry, but that that it's just painted cement, or there's just one material on the back half of the building.
It's like that, the business that's down the street on Kingston where they had 3 buildings and the front was internal to the lot, to buildings facing each other. And the rear of the building was on Kingston Street. And we asked for some design to make it look at least like a front, or more pleasant than doors with sidewalks running up to, or just a pad there, because it was fronting on Kingston Street. So this property has 3 front yards.
Exactly.
So while there's a lot of landscaping on 900 to help there, I think to the point that you're making, Andrew, what we're saying is give us some more architectural enhancements to at least make it pleasing, rather than just precast cement, painted gray, or some articulation to make it look a little better than just the back of a building.
It's not an alley, it's a secondary street.
And that was my concern, is I know Kingston, and there's a stub of Kingston there where it doesn't really proceed past this property yet. But there is definitely in the future plan to carry that all the way through to make that a extra road access to pull traffic off 36. And so that will be a fairly commonly used road. And I think putting some architectural, I think landscape wise, he's doing great. I think there's no question there. You've added the appropriate things on Kingston. It's great. It's just architecturally, doesn't match. That's all.
So Greg, Bill, Dave,
I
Other
agree
thoughts?
with, I want to see something more interesting.
Well, I agree, because what you've done is you've taken 7 waivers and put them into one.
Yep, I don't like that.
What you've done.
So we would all say that there needs to be, we need to see something else as far as the first waiver is concerned.
Yes, I would agree. That's my preference.
Okay, so the second one is to provide for wall plane projections that don't meet the standards of having projections every 40 feet, having a depth of at least 3 feet and minimum width of 40 feet. So what is it that you're actually asking for with waiver A2? That's okay. What is it? So on waiver A2, to provide for wall plane projections that don't meet the standards of having projections every 40 feet with a depth of 3 feet and a minimum width of 40 feet. What is it that you are actually asking for? And are you asking for no projections? Are you asking for larger projections?
You start to provide projections in the service department, then you're gonna mess with the functionality of the service department. And you're gonna have longer bays, shorter bays. It's just, the service department works well with the aisle down the middle, and then you got the bays on each side. And as soon as you start providing this undulation on the elevations, then it's just gonna mess with.
So it's a functionality.
It is, it's a functionality.
Okay.
Of the service department. It's just,
So you're asking to be able to have no articulations in the service department area?
not what this one, yeah.
Two, number 2.
3 feet depth, yeah.
Yeah.
So is this internal or external? I mean, that's.
Right,
how come
The
you
projection.
Just
You can have a
explained, sounds
facade.
like it's more internal
It's more internal.
than external. So I think you understand what you're doing, because you've built these all over the place. We don't.
Yeah.
And so we need you to give
That's
us
why
some
we're at-
More
guidance.
internal. You got these bays that are 24 foot long and 14 foot wide, and it's got alignment bays, and it just works well when everything's, you got the center aisle, and then you got the bays on each side. And as soon as you start providing projections, and you get some bays that are longer than, and now the projection is lined up with the bays, and then it just kind of, I guess we could do that, make some bays longer, some bays shorter. Yeah, those are precast.
So does that cause other issues when you start? Because
Well, yeah, then you got joists that are longer because they're
Yeah.
very precast panels. So as soon as you start providing projections, then you got, it messes with the structure as well, the roof joists and it just, yeah.
So that makes sense to me. That as a functionality, that
It
makes,
would add a lot of cost too.
right, okay.
So, by doing that,
That's something that I
a lot of
would be okay with. I don't know how the rest of the commission feels.
Does it have to impact the inside to have a facade that just has projections on it?
You could add some small projections and not affect the inside by just adding ephes details. You can carry some ephes down the side. You could put some reveals on the precast. You could add a different paint scheme on the outside. You could really dress that up and not affect the inside at all and just keep the straight plane. And you could provide some projections just with added details too. You could add panels to the outside, ephes panels. There's a lot of things you could do.
But not 3 feet.
Right. And then if you add 3 feet, then you are messing with the structure.
Well, I'm wondering, because when I, and maybe I'm wrong, but when I go into Costco, their walls look straight to me, but they got a facade on the outside that has that, doing exactly that. They didn't impact the inside. They just made the outside have a facade.
We could put a couple blocks. 40 feet.
Right,
while we're
minimum
talking here-
minimum of 40 feet and at least 3 feet deep.
Yeah.
Go 40 feet, go in 3 feet, or come out 3 feet. You probably come out 3. We don't want to reduce the depth of the service base, so you come out 3 feet, then go another 40 feet, go in. We could add a couple. It wouldn't hurt the functionality. You just make a couple bays a little bit longer, and a couple joists a little bit longer. Roof joists that span the service back.
Okay,
So, but it does affect the structure of the building, the cost of the building as well.
so would the commission agree that if we could see some compromise there, that's something we'd like to see? Would that
Yeah.
be?
I don't particularly have an issue with the shape of the building, but the facade is so plain and boring. It really, I think, will take away from the aesthetic of the streets around it. So if there are decorative panels or projections, awning, I don't know what all you can put on the existing facility just to create an architectural break of that section. Like we do with other large, big box stores, there are architectural things you can do to enhance the look that don't necessarily affect functionality, because I respect this is a precast system.
Right, I mean, I think we've seen that too with colors as opposed to with actual physical projections or reduced projections, because I think Costco's a good example of going too far out would actually have an impact on delivery trucks. So it was reduced on the extension bay colors to give you that impression of depth or whatever. And then, the roof line.
Lots of that kind of stuff.
Something, because I'm looking at number 3 and 4,
Mhm.
the 50-foot and the 100-foot, and like walls.
Same thing.
Those
It's
are
the same
the plain areas there that, because you've got front yards, and that's the thing, you're fronting on 3 streets that are significant, will be significant.
I mean, basically, we're talking aesthetics here.
That's
And-
my view. It is purely aesthetic. I don't want to change the functionality and the primary structure of the building, because that's,
So three
that's
and
a whole
four,
other issue.
same thing, uninterrupted without projections or recesses. I think you're hearing we would be open to alternatives that you might propose to us. We're not, obviously not voting, not telling you right now.
Sure.
Number 5, provide walls without repeating patterns. I'm not sure what that means. Someone wants to put a houndstooth
So
wallpaper.
we
up.
like to see things that repeat. So this would almost qualify with these windows, how they repeat across the facade, or in the front, how there's, vertical lines that repeat across.
So you already have repeating patterns-ish.
I did not take the windows into consideration.
Okay.
Windows might not have been in there when I looked.
Okay. And then number 7 to
Yeah,
provide.
it's the rear of the building that doesn't have like the actual facade.
Okay, and then number 6 is to provide for facades without architectural features repeating horizontally or vertically, which I think is what we just.
Yeah,
said for
there's
number
several
5.
sections in the ordinance that repeat themselves.
Yeah.
So
And then to provide for east and west facades without 2 separate materials, and that goes, Andy, to your point. Multiple materials or at a minimum colors. So I think we've given you a good overview on each of these. And Mr. Taylor, was it Mr. Taylor who suggested that or Greg, who perhaps coming back might be, it's your call.
So just to clarify, and I think I can see where this is heading, but just so I'm aware, waivers, if the DPR is rejected, it's how many months? Is it a wait before you can refile? Or I guess the waivers would just be rejected.
right, and then you would have to design a building that meets.
And we have to re-notify, I assume, if it's.
Not if you're not
Or is it
requesting
requested
waiver.
Continuance, we're just back here next.
Yeah, I would suggest that you've heard them, and that you should go away with that, redesign the back half of the building and come back with a new design next month.
So is there a request for continuance?
Yes, I think we would like to request a continuance to July.
And this is their first continuance,
It is.
which means it's a continuance of right. So do we need to vote on
You
that?
still vote on it.
Okay,
Motion.
okay.
I'll move that we continue DPR 2508, Ray Skillman Automotive of Avon to the, can you make July? To the July
28th,
That would be with no additional public notice,
correct?
the July meeting of the Plan Commission.
Having heard a motion and a second, we'll take a vote.
Guckenberger,
4.
Zuzen,
4.
Lockebrand, 4, Reed,
4.
Kaufman,
4.
Ransberg.
4. Motion carries. This petition is continued to the July 28th meeting. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to us. Other business, any other business?
I'd like to bring, after,
Staff does not have any.
Okay. Yes?
we've talked about some things tonight that I'm adding to the list of, we seem to be seeing waivers over and over again of the same things, and which calls into question is our UDO what it needs to be. And I was having a conversation with Paul earlier that when we did the UDO, and that was before Linda, Paul, you guys joined the town, the developers were part of the group that helped put the UDO together. And so now we're getting waiver requests from the developers on some of the things as they do development. So do we, and I'm going to pick on how many units before they have to have a second entrance into the subdivision. We talked about foundation plantings. The, street width is another thing that's been a discussion. So I would like us to look at and make a plan to look at this. We've talked about it, but let's get something actionable because we keep seeing the same type of waivers over and over again. That means our UDO is not working and meeting the needs, or we just need to stand on, these are our ordinances.
Or it is working, the petitioner doesn't think it's working.
Well, I think also too, we have to, like tonight, for instance, we're talking about not just a generic waiver, but a waiver consistent with the way that industry is building its buildings, which I don't know if the dealerships were part of our discussion or not, as opposed to generic developers. And I think some of the thing, we have a waiver process for a reason, because sometimes the functionality of our development comes into conflict with our ordinances. A lot of our housing developments are on little pockets of land that are already surrounded by, that just simply don't allow to meet our ordinance.
Maybe it's the wrong place for that type of development. It would be the other thing too. So, those are, and that's what we have to discuss. Parking spaces is another one that comes up of how wide should it be? How deep should it be? So if we could get the ordinances where we could reduce the waivers, I'm assuming it would help you as you're doing these cases, it reduces the work because now you don't have a developer that's probably working on you to give them some guidance to let them develop what they want. But to do that, they have to come forward and get a waiver. And I think I've heard stories, no matter the guidance that you give them, they do what they want to do. So they come forward even when you might have given a guidance that maybe isn't the best thing to do. So it just seems like, again, the same type of waivers keep coming forward. Let's look at our ordinances and modify those.
I think there's some waivers that I've seen over and over about the number of ingress, egress, to places that it seems like there's an in-between the boulevard entrance that's not considered. I could see that being something that we modified. I think there's other waivers I've seen that I'm okay with because they're coming in and they're trying to present a solution that's in the spirit of the waiver. So they might need an adjustment. I'm more okay with those, but those ones that are repeating, I completely agree. So it would be nice to address them in some way.
How can we help you in this matter? Because it's not like, okay, throw it out there and see, I'm going to go home now. But how can we help you with that?
So yeah, we've taken note of every waiver request that we've had in these discussions, and that certainly does help when you all discuss it amongst yourself to know what waivers you think are fine, which ones you're willing to grant. If you grant a waiver over and over again, then that's the sign that your ordinance needs to change.
Well, I think one of what comes to mind commercial wise is the drive-throughs. We've given multiple waivers to allow for drive-throughs on the 36 tier 1
So that is a special exception and not a variance.
okay.
And a special exception is different than a variance, and it has different findings. It's a permitted use. It's just permitted by special exception. So the level of what they have to prove to you is not nearly what a variance. It's different. It's we're not just putting it into place and then throwing it out the window at the same time. It is a process, so they have to come and show you how they are going to do that drive-through. It was never meant to prohibit them if it was put in as a special exception and not outright prohibited.
What are you seeing the most waiver requests for?
The access at this point, But I would say that all of the properties that we've had come through this year and late last year have been infill sites without stubs to them. So it has been more difficult to develop those sites. They are not, with the exception of Silver Springs, they are not new ground that has ample opportunity to find access points all over the place. So those are precisely the reason why waivers are in place in your ordinance for them to come before you and ask for relief.
Or when we have difficult circumstances.
But don't those infill, I mean, they could do what they want if they'd follow the ordinance, it wouldn't require the waivers. And their response is that it doesn't make economic sense for them for the number of units like the townhouses, the townhomes. So that's where, again, it's like, okay, and what I hear is, well, 49 is arbitrary. Okay, but it's our ordinance.
It is.
So if that's not the right number, let's make the right number, because you're going to get people like me is like, that's the number, why do I have to be looking at a different waiver when our ordinance says this? So.
I hear you.
I'm
And
assuming it would help you.
we are going through the ordinance. Paul has gone through the entire ordinance, and he and I together have made it about through half of it. And once we get through the second half and get a draft, it's coming before you, and we'll probably take it one or two chapters at a time. Maybe we'll get together as a separate committee that's not during your meeting time to go through it.
Do a
we can
working
have these-
session with the town council, maybe.
Right.
One that keeps popping up that I've seen a lot is the whole situation about masonry. That 80%, and somebody comes through and says, "Oh, I don't want to do any at all." But to Paul's point earlier tonight, is there any way necessarily, if somebody wants to waive that, for them in fact to be required to bring a sample in to show us?
We can certainly make that.
Start making that a requirement?
Absolutely, we can.
So what's your burden, the burden of proof something on them?
Absolutely, we can make them bring in materials.
Concern of mine, if that's out there and everything, we're just,
Right.
check the box every time, we're expected to check the box.
I'll be
We're talking only if a waiver's requested, right?
Right.
Right, yeah.
Look at that, 80% down to nothing, that's pretty extreme.
Absolutely, we can change our petitions to require that.
I'll be a broken record on that, because it's like, okay, you don't want to do our ordinance? Look at Lowe's and Carmel, it's all brick. And so don't tell me, if you want to do business here, you're going to build your business to be able to do business here. So, and that's the thing, is like, show us what you want other than, well, our design standards by corporate says this. Yeah, well.
Well, sometimes,
Wrong place.
to my point, the Lowe's in Carmel, that's a nice Lowe's. It is all masonry, because Carmel said, this is what we do, and they wanted to be there. And, some people they want to be here bad enough, and they'll like, yeah, we'll move on that. And then we've seen other proposals where they just don't want it. I mean, they want what they want, and they want what they want. And
We saw something similar with the Bank of America proposal. They came in and broke every ordinance
Yes.
we had, and we said, no, we don't like it. And they said, okay, and they came back and had one that met the ordinances.
right.
So
Well, I think when you go on vacation, I know I do, and I think everybody else does, you look at other buildings and you go, wow, they built that like that, and they told me they couldn't do that here? Why do we let them off the hook?
Hold their feet to the fire, man.
So we shouldn't. I mean, we should demand what we want.
Hold their feet to the fire.
Well, and you also have to follow architectural trends too. But masonry isn't always in trend. Brick isn't always in trend. And these metal panels are in high trend now.
Yes, they are.
And it's still a good material. I mean, it's not like it's fiberboard or something. They're generally good material if they're using good materials. I mean, you can't be good material.
And I think
that's what
it's
they
their
said.
presentation, though. They have to educate me. I don't know this. I'm not a developer. I'm not a builder. I'm not a contractor. So educate me, show me, this is what you don't want. Okay, I get that. Now what are you going to replace it with? And then show me those materials.
Well, and I think I'm glad that you asked the question about the materials they were wanting to use. Are they on an approved list somewhere? And I think that's the first step. Are they on, if we're going to grant a waiver, at a minimum, they need to be on an approved list. But if they're coming in with some brand new And we ran into this a few years ago, and I don't remember, but it was a composite that they were wanting to use. It was before we had the new UDO. And we asked them to bring in samples because we didn't know what they were talking about. Because it was in.
First watch.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. It was for, yeah, so. Okay, anything else that needs to be?
I do have one more
Paul
thing.
and Linda are working on the UDO finessing, and what else? And what else?
The comp plan, public presentation will actually take place at a special meeting of this body, and it's going to be on July 14th here in this room. So you'll have 2 meetings next month. There will be no business at the 14th meeting. It will just be to have a public presentation of it. You will actually consider it at a meeting in August for formal recommendation to council. 6:30, just like your meeting here. So they're just, public will be invited and they will just give a presentation of everything, of the draft of the document.
Is that 6:30?
Correct. There'll be no petitions and you will not vote on the comp plan. It's just a presentation.
So this will be a presentation to the commission, but we will not be voting on
Commission,
anything.
correct, and that the public's invited to.
And-
So
okay.
it's a public presentation of it, and then you'll see, at your August meeting is when you'll actually consider it. And it's, you can also give comments back on the draft at that time.
Will there be public comment on the 14th?
They will,
Or they'll take questions or?
they'll take questions. It's not going to be a formal, it's not going to be as formal as our meeting.
Okay.
It's not a hearing.
It's not a hearing, for sure, but
Because you're not going to consider it, but yeah, it's often, sometimes limited questions are allowed, but you're not required to allow it.
is it going to be televised and?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All your meetings will be required to be live streamed after July 1.
Oh, okay.
They have been live streamed for some time now, but it's a requirement starting July 1.
Okay.
July 14th. Okay,
Yep.
And I'll send you an email reminder just because it's a non-traditional meeting.
Okay.
And then next month, we have this continued case as well as one other continued, but no new cases.
Oh, good.
Committee reports.
Redevelopment, invoice approvals, in addition to invoice approvals, Angelina Way and County Road 900 East Roundabout bid was approved, in addition to change orders 5 and 6 for Dan Jones Phase 2.
BZA? Trying to remember what we did.
Very quickly.
Oh, that's right. Dutch Brothers was continued. That's right. And we had a long conversation about it. Thank you for that.
You did?
Well, I mean, we had a conversation about it, about the continuance. Anything else from the town? Okay, meeting adjourned.